authentications, P1, EMS E3, Intune is EMS E3 or E5. So identity protection, which figures into conditional access a little bit. This is also a P2 or EMS E5 feature. So this is the sign-in risk stuff, and we'll talk about how that works within conditional access a little bit as we go through it. There's a special feature called custom controls that I'm not going to really talk about, but it provides some interesting extensibility mechanisms within the framework that you can take advantage of. That used to be P2, and they moved it back to P1. That's probably the only time that will ever happen in the Microsoft licensing journey. And then cloud access security, which we'll talk about a little bit as well too, is actually it's not P2, it's EMS E5. It's separate. Sorry, that's incorrect. I will fix that before I send the slides out. All right, moving on. So let's talk about concepts. When we're talking about conditional access, essentially what we're talking about is how people get to their applications. So there's this whole aspect of who gets to which applications, which is generally managed via within Azure AD via user assignment and role-based access control. But this is the how part. And these two things work in concert with each other. So I'll give you a couple of different real-world examples from what we do internally to start talking about how a conditional access policy works. So when Accenture employees are trying to access anything in Azure, they must perform multi-factor authentication. And this is actually one of our policies. And so it's based on this notion of condition, statement, and control. So the condition is accessing anything in Azure, and the control is they must perform multi-factor authentication. So we have this notion, condition, control, condition, control. Same thing over here. When specific users access this specific application, they must also use a domain join Windows PC. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to device-based authentication. And this stacks on top of that existing multi-factor authentication requirement. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a flavor for the structure of how these things work. And now I'm going to jump along into the anatomy of a policy. So out of curiosity, who here has actually played with conditional access or used it? Okay, so a lot of this stuff will look pretty familiar. Will end up probably being a little bit of a review for some of you. But essentially, when you get into the Azure portal and you're looking at configuring these things, this is what your default policy looks like. So the top two things up there are the things you can target, users and applications. The middle thing are what the conditions are, and we'll go through those in more detail. And then down below are the controls. All right? So this is the general anatomy of a policy, how it's laid out. Any questions so far? Good? All right. Let's talk about targets. So there are basically two things that we target within a policy. We can target specific users, and we can target applications. All right? And I'll just move on to this. So let's talk a little bit about targeting users. This is what the actual UI looks like. So within the ability to target users within a policy, you can both do includes and excludes. And as probably most people, especially in an IT organization, know, almost all identity management is exception management. There's always exceptions to every rule that you want to apply. Conditional access actually makes that incredibly easy by having this notion of excludes sprinkled throughout the policies everywhere. So you still need a strategy for managing exclusions within conditional access, but at least they give you a mechanism to do it right there within the policy. So these actually show our default MFA policy, and we actually do apply it to all users in the directory. There's other different kinds of subgroups that you can also apply your policies to as well. You can apply policies to guest users, which people familiar with guest access or Azure AD business to business. I'm not going to really talk about that too much, but it's an incredibly powerful feature for collaborating with your business partners. That is another P1 feature that's it depends on how you use it in terms of what licensing requirements are associated with it. But it's an incredibly powerful feature of the platform and definitely something worth knowing about that I'm not going to really talk about again. But you have the ability to target specific policies at guest users if you want to. You can also target directory roles and specific users and groups within your policy. And then you can also do exclusions. It is very common for us within our policy framework to apply certain standard exclusions. Like, for example, with multi-factor authentication, it's pretty common that you may have service accounts that need to log into things that can't perform multi-factor authentication. You see down there that PIM Firefighter 1 at the bottom. We have a couple of firefighter accounts that are used as basically our break glass accounts for Azure AD. Generally speaking, the best practice is that you keep those locked up in a vault. You know how to get to them in case you have a real emergency, but you probably don't want multi-factor authentication. Like if you're in a situation where you're using your firefighter account, that's not necessarily a place you want to be. So we're generally really uniform about applying these exclusions across policies where they make sense. But in any event, that's targeting users. Any questions on that? All right, so targeting applications. So what can you target? Essentially, anything that is integrated with Azure AD can be targeted with a conditional access policy. So that includes everything within Office 365. It includes SaaS applications that you bring in through the marketplace or integrate directly that are using as Office or Azure AD-based single sign-on. It's any of your custom applications. So this is a big deal for us. We have lots and lots and lots of line of business applications that are integrated as claims-aware applications in Azure AD. We also have a lot still integrated with ADFS, but this is a really standard deployment model for us within IT, and so the vast majority of our applications actually fall into that middle swim lane. And so then Brian also talked a little bit about the app proxy. So app proxy is an incredibly powerful way of taking on-prem applications that do legacy authentication and essentially applying modern auth to them. And once you apply modern auth to them, you can also apply conditional access policies to them, like applying multi-factor authentication, requiring domain joiner compliant device, and putting all these different kinds of controls, location, all this stuff that we'll get to later. So essentially, anything that you can get to touch the cloud through single sign-on can be targeted through this. Supposedly, there's an upcoming feature which will include application groups, which doesn't exist yet. It's a feature that Microsoft is still toying with that will allow you to actually manage applications in groups and apply them that way, but not quite there yet. There's another neato little thing up there at the top. So there's a new feature that was added recently, and I'm not going to really talk about it except for right now. So typically you target cloud apps, but there's another thing up there called user actions. So this is a new feature that was added recently, and the specific workload it allows you to target is your self-service password reset registration experience. So you can apply conditional access controls that would be sort of like, you might say, I can only let my people register for self-service password reset or Azure MFA from a trusted network, and that kind of thing, which is an important thing to think about because generally speaking, those types of experiences you can't apply MFA to your MFA registration. It's a chicken and egg problem. So you may wish to apply other kinds of constraints around how people get to those experiences to make sure that they're more secure, because otherwise they're potentially subject to password theft attacks. And it's nice to have some options to be able to protect those. So that's what's hiding behind that user actions thing, and that is the last time we will speak of it. It says it right over there as a little exclamation point. Be careful with all cloud apps. You want to make sure you know what you're doing when you target that. We actually do target all cloud apps with an exclusion, which I don't think I necessarily showed you in there. There's a couple of apps we exclude from our all MFA policy. I think there's it's only 3 out of over 1,000 so far. So generally speaking, we're all in on this. Any questions on targeting? All right. Conditions. So these are the different conditions that are available that you can apply to. I'm not going to hit all of these. I'm going to hit the top 3 and then kind of skip over the last 2. So we'll get into these in a little bit more detail. The one thing I will say about device state is that device state is both a condition and a control, which is kind of neat. So you can both use device state as a condition. So you can say, if somebody is coming to me from a hybrid join device, then do this. You can also implement it as a control, which would be to say, if somebody is getting to this application, I want them to be on a hybrid join device. Using device state as a condition is, it probably doesn't get used very often, but it's an interesting option to have in your tool belt. And it's just something to be aware of. It's the only thing that applies, appears in both categories. So let's jump into sign-in risk. OK, so Brian talked a little bit about Azure AD identity protection. Typically, when you're using identity protection, you're going to apply a user risk policy and a sign-in risk policy. And those are basically modeled as conditional access policies. But within conditional access, you can do a whole bunch more stuff that's a lot more rich with the sign-in risk engine. So let me just give you an example of something you might be wish to do. So you've got like your executive leadership team, right? And your executive leadership team has access to some board materials or some material non-public system that you're really, really concerned about that also happens to be like a cloud SaaS app. So what you might do is say, you know what? For these people in the executive leadership team, when they're going to this specific app, if the sign-in risk looks high on this, I'm not going to let them in no matter what. Or maybe I'm going to force them to do some other things. But the basic thing is because you can use sign-in risk as a condition, you can apply that really granularly to specific workloads within your cloud environment if you have this feature wired up. So it's an interesting thing to be able to use within your tool belt, in addition to just applying those kind of global user risk and sign-in risk policies that you do through identity protection. All right. The risk-based system is a really, really interesting topic. Like if you ever get an opportunity for someone to really explain how it works and all the machine learning language stuff under the hood, it's really, really quite impressive, the things that Microsoft does with this. And it's worthy of a whole topic, but that's not today. So let's talk a little bit about device targeting. So device targeting is you can decide which devices do I want to apply this policy to, and so you can say any device oh, that screenshot's out of date. There's so when you do any device, that also includes unsupported devices, which is potentially useful. So there's a number of devices that are not supported by conditional access, like Linux, for example, and Chromebooks, another thing not supported. So when you include any device in there, they will be targeted even though you can't apply device-based restrictions to them because they can't be registered. And we'll talk more about that later. But you can also target these individual things in here as well, which is sometimes really helpful to be able to do. Question?
Yeah, so if you have an environment that uses both Windows and Macs,
mm-hmm.
does it play well, or does the Macs fall into, obviously, Linux?
So Mac is well supported within the platform in terms of being able to register those devices. But you also have, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we get towards the end, where we talk about device registration. Let's say you are registering all of your Windows devices, but you don't want to take the plunge on Intune and Jamf for your Mac environment, and so you need the Intune Jamf stuff in order to do the device registration for Mac OS stuff. So if you decide not to do that, then you could then say, you know what, I'm either not going to let the Macs in at all, or I'm going to let the Macs in by just only targeting Windows and maybe mobile to this particular policy. So you can make business decisions around how you want to target that based on how you're managing your Mac OS fleet and what kind of investments you want to make there. But the good thing is that Macs can be first-class citizens of the model because they do support device authentication. Yes, Brian? I did not. I don't even know what those are.
That's like 2 weeks ago, Apple released iOS 13. Safari on iPads no longer says it's iOS, it says it's macOS.
Oh.
So if you've got controls to control who can access Exchange from like an iPad or an iPhone, the iPads totally drop out as soon as people update it to iOS 13. So you check the macOS box, but then suddenly all of those Macs that you had are subject to the controls you only wanted your iDevices to apply. So.
That's a raucous good time. Thank you, Apple, and thank you, Brian, because I think our CXP guy warned me about that, but I didn't know what he was talking about. And we've mostly migrated our policies towards any device. Occasionally, there are things that you need to do to target specific devices, but we've generally tried to move our policy management towards any device wherever we possibly can. We used to have a stance where we would say, you know what, we only have really good control of the Windows devices, so we're only going to apply these tight controls on them, and we're going to let people who are accessing them from unmanaged mobile devices do whatever they want. And then after a while, it was like, you know what, from a security perspective, maybe that's not the place that we want to be, and maybe we would like to pivot it the other way. And once we got to a kind of a better place with management of our mobile devices with MDM and whatnot, we were able to pivot in the other direction. But you get to make choices one way or the other. Yes?
So we're doing the Mac support management for CA, and one thing I don't know the answer to this is the company portal app required on Macs, and it's not on PCs. I don't know the reason why. Do you know why that is?
I do not, because I know basically nothing about like the Intune Jamf stack. My guess is that it's an Intune related thing. But yeah, my device management skills are weak. I'll bet Brian knows, because Brian does everything. But yeah, I work for a big IT shop, and device management's a different department. So, but that would be my guess, is that that's an Intune thing. All right. We'll talk a little bit about location. Basically, the idea here is that you can implement controls based on a whole bunch of different IP-based restrictions, and you can put in your own custom ranges here for where people are coming from. You can do country-specific things. You can also you can name your locations, and you can also mark locations as trusted. But there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with this. Like, for example, this is a mechanism by which you might potentially do like inside-outside types of policies. Like, when people are outside of my network, I want them to do this. When they're inside my network, I want them to do this. Or you might say, you know what? I don't ever want anyone from this part of the world getting into my stuff, period. And that's another thing that you can do. Or if my people travel from here to here, then I want to put these kind of controls in place. So there's a whole rich set of functions that you can do here related to address-based targeting. I will show you one kind of wacky trick that we implemented. So we had an application that we really, really wanted. It was a legacy auth app, but it was really highly sensitive, and we wanted to put multi-factor authentication on it because it's really important security control for our InfoSec guys. But it was on the internal network initially. And the only way that we could figure out to get multi-factor authentication on this legacy web app was by using the app proxy. But when we put the app proxy in front of it to get MFA through our MFA control, now it's on the public internet. And the guys are like, you know, we really kind of don't want it on the public internet either. But the app proxy is always on the public internet. So what we actually did was we implemented a conditional access policy, which essentially enforced that you could only get to the application if you were coming from one of our internal IP address ranges. And so basically the effective control, even though the app is actually on the public internet, if you don't access it from within our internal network, you can't get to it. And so all sorts of really interesting things you can do with this control to get interesting behaviors. All right, enough on location. So controls, there's a bunch of controls. I'm gonna not really get into a whole lot of detail on all of these things. So we'll talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication and some of the device auth stuff. I will mention that there's a lot of really interesting expansion in the session controls, and that's where cloud access security fits in as well too. But there's a bunch of new features related to session management that you can control within things, and there's some new features that have been deployed as part of SharePoint and Exchange that allow you to apply controls within within those applications. So, for example, within a specific SharePoint site, you might have like a big SharePoint farm in Office 365 with a bunch of different sites. So you might say, I want this one site to require manager-compliant device, but the rest of them I don't care about. And so that's a new feature within SharePoint itself that you can implement to do site-specific conditional access controls. So that's all we're going to talk about there. No more slides on that. Maybe talk a little bit about terms of use as well too. So terms of use can be applied as a conditional access control. Most of us who work in large organizations have lawyers, and lawyers love terms of use. So this is a really great way of being able to put terms of use. Basically what happens is whatever language they draft up and can give you in a PDF file, you can configure as a terms of use, and then you can make people accept it or else they can't get to the application. And you can have different terms of use applied to different people. So you might have a terms of use for your guests who are coming into your environment versus a terms of use that you apply to your employees and whatnot. But you have all the full granular set of controls here. There's some new features within terms of use that allow you to do things like accept it on every device that they come in through, or accept it periodically so that they'll expire and whatnot. But it's a potentially interesting and useful feature, especially if you have lawyers who wish for you to make such things happen. All right, let's jump over to MFA. Okay, so the first thing I will say, and I probably preaching to the choir on this, but multi-factor authentication is almost certainly the most important security control that you can implement in your organization to secure your application landscape. It is definitely the case that multi-factor authentication can be overcome by a dedicated attacker, but it still wards off like 99.9% of the attacks that would go through with just password-based authentication. And so of the investments that you can make in your security landscape, MFA is by far the most important thing. We have gone all in on this, so like all 500,000 people at Accenture have MFA, and we've applied this to over 5,000 applications using both Azure AD Conditional Access and ADFS. And it's really, really, really important. So the main thing to know with multi-factor authentication, so you don't actually have to use Azure MFA. Typically you will, but you don't have to, especially if you are using federated authentication with ADFS. You can use any MFA provider that integrates with ADFS. Like for example, we use Semantic VIP internally with our stuff, and Semantic VIP gets used all over our entire Azure landscape. So this is basically just looking for multi-factor authentication. It's not necessarily requiring that it be Azure MFA. That's just kind of the default, okay? Azure also has other MFA providers. I actually don't know how any of that stuff works because I've never messed with it. Another thing to know about all the new passwordless technologies, these things all count as MFA within the MFA ecosystem. So anyone who's considering deploying Hello for Business or device sign-in or FIDO, all of these authentication mechanisms actually count as MFA to Azure AD, which is interesting and helpful. Hello for Business is my new favorite thing to talk about. So if you want to talk to me about that at lunch, I will be happy to talk to you about it. It's an incredibly powerful and productive way to make things secure all the way down to the laptop level, and has really, really great integration with Azure AD. Okay, so we are going to take a quick pivot. I'm going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting, and then we'll take a few minutes to to go over some of the device authentication deep dive stuff. Sound good? All right, so troubleshooting conditional access. You basically have 3 things in your toolkit. It used to be 2, but now there are 3. And so let's talk about these a little bit. So the most important thing that you will be using within conditional access to effectively troubleshoot is the sign-in logs. So within Azure AD, Azure AD will collect your sign-in logs for up to 30 days for you in the portal. And in the sign-in logs will report which conditional access policies applied to any given authentication event, and also tell you what the result of those things were. It's incredibly helpful to see what's actually happening at runtime with your users. And so another thing that I will recommend to people with your sign-in logs, and this is not a talk about Azure Monitor, but I'm a proponent of using Azure Monitor to aggregate your sign-in logs and keep them for a longer period of time, and have them available within an analytics workspace to be able to go back and look at them over time and do more interesting and advanced queries than what you can do here. You only get 30 days by default out of the portal, but you can keep them for as long as you want if you're willing to pay some extra storage cost within Azure Monitor, and it's incredibly useful to do that. And it's also really, really good to collect your audit logs over there as well too, all the changes that are going on within your Azure AD landscape. But sign-in logs are your friend. There's another tool within the stack called the What If tool. And so the What If tool will basically do some analysis and tell you, if I implement this policy, what will happen? And it is incredibly useful for not making mistakes. Conditional access gives you a lot of power to do terrible, terrible things, especially if you don't have a really good test environment. You can make horrible mistakes in production where you may lock the CEO out of his email and get a talking to. So it is very good to test your policies and model them, and the What If tool is really, really good for that. Okay. So there's this new thing. I believe it's still in preview, but there's another new feature called Report Only Mode, which is it's a nice extension on top of the What If tool. And so there's a bunch of limitations with the What If tool. So there's certain things that can only really be resolved at runtime. For example, sign-in risk. It's super difficult to test because you don't really know what the risk environment is going to be out there. And it's not always even easy to simulate any of the risk events. Another thing that's really difficult to predict at runtime is device authentication. Because device authentication has to be deployed in your environment and may or may not work in all cases. You may run into operational issues with it. The What If tool isn't really necessarily going to give you a great indication of what any given user's experience is going to be like. So enter Report Only mode, which is a new feature that's in preview now. So essentially what this does is it allows you to enable a policy in instead of on or off, it'll be in report only mode. And in report only mode, there's a special set of logs that are generated that will tell you if this policy had executed, this is what would have happened. So it'll be able to say this would have been applied and the user would have been blocked, or the policy would, or the user would have been allowed through. And so if you want to be able to experiment within your organization, especially when you get into the device-based conditional access policies, where you're not really totally sure how well your device-based deployment is going with your device fleet, this is really, really helpful to have. And so I'm not exactly sure when Microsoft's going to be releasing this. I would assume fairly certain soon it will be in public preview if it's not already. Anyone out here heard of it? Out of curiosity? Am I the only one who's been experimenting with it so far? Okay, so yeah, be looking for this. It's really, really powerful and useful. My annoyance with it is that you have to have the security administrator role to use the workbook. So, and it piggybacks on top of log analytics. So you have to also have like a log analytics subscription. You have to dedicate some storage and some spend to it. That to me isn't really a big deal. The security administrator role to get to this is annoying. Generally speaking, because it's a reporting function, my belief is that it should be security reader, which we tend to give out much more liberally than we give out security administrator, which has change rights within things. Microsoft does not agree. They believe that should be security administrator, and we have politely agreed to disagree, but it makes it more difficult for us to get usage out of this in our organization the way we've kind of divvied up the privilege roles. So any event, report-only mode coming soon. All right, let's see. We have 10 minutes for a device authentication deep dive. So I'm going to maybe do, maybe I'll try and do this sort of quickly in 5 minutes and then save a little bit of time for questions, see how far we can get with this. Does it sound good? OK. So I guess it's probably the case that everyone in this room is living the reality that endpoint security is actually a really big deal. Yeah, and the health of our corporate devices is of paramount importance these days, and I'm sure the endpoint security people spend a lot of time trying to make this stuff happen. And make sure that our devices have not been compromised. So my company we were kind of like the original BYO company. We were very much of the opinion that we could securely put all of our applications on the public internet and just secure them with multi-factor authentication and single sign-on and provide them to our workforce. And because we're a consulting company, we're frequently in other people's networks, and very few people actually work out of our corporate network. Having like an application suite that supported our business for our roaming workforce was incredibly important for us. So this was very, very, very good. But as the IT landscape has evolved over the last few years and device security has become much, much more important, our information security guys started to look at that and say, maybe it's not so great that all these apps are just kind of hanging off of the public internet and can be logged into from any device as long as they get through the MFA challenge. So maybe we would like to actually be able to restrict things to just our devices and make sure that those devices are in a certain state. Talking a little bit about us, there's a little bit of Accenture landscape there. So our original foray into CA was focused very much on this device authentication feature because we were trying to essentially take our most sensitive applications and pull them back inside the tent in terms of restricting which devices could get to them without trying to do that using a network perimeter-based security posture. It's very identity focused in terms of how we're deploying that, but focus on ensuring that only our trusted devices are getting access to them. Okay? So device authentication is by far the most complicated part of the entire CA landscape because there's all this plumbing that exists to make it work. So in order for devices to have device state, they have to be able to authenticate. So the device is actually authenticating in addition to the user. And with Hello for Business, these things actually happen kind of simultaneously, but you're actually getting authentication from both the device and the user independently. In order for a device to authenticate, a device has to get registered as well too. And the registration experience tends to vary, but we're talk a little bit about how that works across the various landscape. It kind of breaks down like this. So with Windows 10, you have a couple of different ways that this can be done. Most people are probably doing hybrid Azure AD join. Do you have anyone hybrid Azure AD join in your environment? So this is generally not that hard to deploy. Anyone using like Modern Management Azure AD join? No? Yeah, we're barely scratching the surface on that as well too. And there's also Add Worker School account, which is something that I would generally recommend that you avoid using. You can't ever get a Add Worker School account to be compliant unless you end up Intune managing it. And then there's a question of like, do you really want to Intune manage people's personal devices? There's a bunch of stuff to think about with that bottom thing. How are most people on Windows 10 by now, or do we still have like a lot of 7 and or any 8 one out there? So you can still do device registration on 7. We've mostly gotten our fleet off of this. I think we have like maybe 10,000 Windows 7 machines, which for us is like small because we have like 600,000 workstations floating around out there. So it's a really, that's a small exception group for Accenture. 10,000 is like barely even like makes the bar graph show up. But you can still do it there. In mobile and Mac OS, devices get registered essentially through Intune. Okay?
So how does Hello for Business relate to domain join here? I mean, because they both end up with device authentication.
They do. They piggyback right on top of each other. I think I have a little bit of stuff on that later, but I'll just talk about it now. So Hello for Business piggybacks on top of Windows 10 device registration. And it can be hybrid joined or Azure AD joined. Both use cases are supported. There's a bunch of different deployment models for Windows Hello for Business because you have both cert trust and key trust, and then you have the Azure AD hybrid version, and there's like the on-prem version, which you should never ever use. But essentially, device registration is a prerequisite step for Windows Hello for Business. You get that deployed first, and then you layer your Hello for Business over on top of that. Is that short answer? Okay, not that short. So let's run through a few of these. So for Azure AD Join, this is where the settings for this are all in the portal, as well as add worker school account. All of the hybrid join stuff is done through settings that are managed through Azure AD Connect. And I'm not going to show any of those, but that's where they are. And this talks a little bit about how the hybrid registration stuff works. I think I'm going to actually skip this a little bit. And this just gives you a, like if you're looking in the devices portal or the devices blade of the Azure AD portal, gives you a sense of what a whole bunch of different types of devices might look like in your environment once you've started registering them a bunch of different ways. Some things were registered via MDM, some things were registered through hybrid join, some things were just Azure AD registered. So there's a whole bunch of different ways, but you can basically see all this stuff in there. Also, gets all that stuff via Graph and PowerShell as well too. Let's see. And so, yeah, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit quickly. So within, for hybrid join, typically what happens is the machine is traditionally domain joined first, and then you have your the proper configuration settings deployed in your environment to make this work. Devices will register automatically with Azure AD, which is nice. You kind of don't have to do anything except for wait for this to happen. Typically in a mature environment where you are handing out workstations to people, devices will tend to register as soon as you domain join them before you probably even hand them out to your end users. I actually don't have a really good understanding of how any of this stuff works with autopilot because, like, once again, I'm not a device guy, but I'll bet Brian does. And then all this state gets set in the device objects within Azure AD. One thing to know with hybrid join is in order for the hybrid join stuff to work correctly in Azure AD, you have to sync your computer objects to the cloud. So they have to be within sync scope to go up to the cloud in order for that piece of it to work correctly. If you exclude your computer objects from your Azure AD Connect scope, it does not work right, at least to get right back. The Azure AD stuff will work, but the on-prem stuff won't. And then with Azure AD Premium and with write back enabled, your device objects will also end up being written back to on-prem, which will support on-prem authentication scenarios. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think I have 1 minute left. I had a little bit more information. Compliance, Intune, that's the answer. Things get compliant is because Intune said they were. That's the short answer there. And I don't think I've got enough time to talk about how how to do troubleshooting or how authentication works. But maybe pause for a minute and see if you guys have any additional questions. And then, like I said, I'll make sure to make the rest of these slides available. But any questions from anyone?
One of the challenges with conditional access and device registration is one of the workflow scenarios that I was testing as an example is for conditional access policies require two-factor authentication, for example, O365 service. So device registration types, Azure AD join, hybrid, registered. There's one challenge with registered where conditional access doesn't fully apply to basically a loosely trusted or registered device. Has there been any workarounds or workflows that you've been able to develop for that?
Well, so it's interesting because one of the things you can do within conditional access is you can have like an OR control where it's hybrid join or multi-factor authentication, which we actually don't use. We always require MFA no matter what, and then we may also require in addition hybrid join. But the main thing is like hybrid join, which is different from Azure AD join, and it's different from add worker school account, which is just registered. Those basically that doesn't get flagged as with like the is managed flag in Azure AD. So I think I'm not sure if I really understand exactly what you've run into there, but I think the main thing is that you do really have to have the hybrid join thing working in order to be able to use that control. Yeah, if you are running into issues with hybrid join not working well, like all the troubleshooting stuff then potentially comes to apply. And the report-only mode stuff will probably be incredibly helpful for you once that feature releases so that you can actually see what's going on in test policies that are hard to understand how they'll actually work in your environment if you don't have a really good handle on your how device registration is actually flowing through your environment. So, okay, I'm 100% certain that we are out of time. It's time for lunch. But anyone who wants to get me during lunch, I'm happy to talk about this topic and anything else identity. And thanks a lot for coming.